Hi, this is Barry. Today I am happy to have Genjo Marinello as our guest. Thank you, Genjo. Genjo is our Renzai Priest. Genjo, could you please tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, practice and teaching wise?
Well, I'm here in Seattle, Washington. I'm abbot of the DaiBosatsu Chobo Zen Temple, which is also a residential practice center. There are 8 people who live here on the property, which you see behind me,
Mm-hmm.
here at our practice center, in addition to having people from around the Seattle area come to the temple and then all over the world who come via Zoom. We offer daily meditation practice. We have once a month, we have a zazen or a half day sit.
Mm-hmm.
Every 6 months, a 3-day sit. Every quarter, a week-long sit. And they're hybrid at this point, both in person and on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. And you do some counseling too, is that correct?
Yes, I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington, so I offer psychotherapy 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm. And do you have patients that are like not involved with Zen at all, or are they usually people that know of you through the Zen world?
Almost everyone who I see is not involved in the Zen practice. And in fact, I don't want them deeply involved in my training center if we're still seeing each other in for psychotherapy. They're welcome to come to a sit though.
Mm-hmm. And do you live at the center yourself?
I do,
Uh-huh.
with my wife and my dog, Charlie.
Okay. And does he have Buddha nature? No, I'm just kidding.
Of
Right.
course.
That's cheesy. So, so I like to usually I start off asking people a little bit about their childhood. Could you tell us where you grew up, kind of what your very early years were like?
This is Charlie who wants to be in my lap, so
Okay.
there is no other way. It must be.
That's great.
Whenever he hears me talking to somebody, he wants attention. So, yeah, I grew up mostly in Los Angeles, and my parents were both fallen away Catholics. They were married to other people when I was born, so that didn't sit too well with the church. My mother said I was baptized Catholic just in case, but mostly grew up unchurched, but always hungry for what is this reality and where do we come from and who's asking that question and is there something bigger than my own narrow egoistic or somebody else's narrow egoistic perspective of the world? And those have always been questions in my mind that have driven me
You say always, do you
that
mean
path
like from a child?
from a child.
How did you articulate it at a young age? Like why I'm here type of thing?
Yes, as a very young child, I was taught to believe in God. So God was the answer to all of these things. And I was very fervent with prayers at my bedside, says my mother, which is why she didn't want me to go to the church because she was sure I'd end up a Catholic priest at a very young age. And then she said much later, well, gosh, if I had let you do that, then maybe you'd still have hair. And now look what happened. And was a running joke in our family. Anyway, what was your question again? I lost it, Barry.
Oh, how, like as a very young kid, how did you articulate kind of the great doubt, so to speak?
All right, belief in God. And then when I became more or less an atheist, because my father was constantly teaching that anything that had to do with religion was a crutch because we didn't know something. So, all right, if I don't have that, I still have these questions in my mind. What is this reality? Where did it all come from? And why are we here? And who's asking the questions? I wasn't as articulate, but I know that those were the questions in my mind. So when I learned about astronomy and I found my first constellation in the sky, then I was going to be an astronomer. From the time I was in junior high, all the way through high school, I thought astronomy and cosmology, this will answer my questions. and physics, get right down to the brass tacks. And somehow the scientific method will explain all. And so I was going to become a cosmologist or an astrophysicist. And then I had a wonderful teacher, my freshman English teacher, who really completely sparked me and changed everything when he said, where does the inspiration for sages and scientists and artists come from? And I thought, yeah, that's what I want to know. Where does inspiration and insight come from? Where does Einstein get his ideas? And so now that was my trek, and that led me to Zen.
And so growing up, would you say you're a happy kid? Were you kind of consumed with questions of life and death? Did you go through a fun phase? Yeah.
I'm on a Zoom call, sweetheart. Sorry about that. Hope you can edit this thing. So, let's see. Was I a happy kid? Sort of. Mm-hmm. And my father was very distant and rather a brute. So that was problematic. And my mother was very loving, but she had her problems too. She was only 19 when I was born. And so I was kind of raised by a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how did you first hear about kind of Eastern spirituality? Did you do martial arts? Did you find it in a book? What was?
Well, back to my freshman English teacher, he had us read all kinds of freshman English literature, but he also had us read a book where we read as literature the Sermon on the Mount by the historical Jesus and the Sermon at Benares by the historical Buddha. And they didn't make much sense to me at the time, but that was my very first exposure to Buddhism.
Was this, you probably said it and I missed it, was this freshman high school or freshman college?
Freshman college.
Okay. Yeah. And so how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Right now, let's see, I'm 67. Yeah,
so you're too little young to, you missed the hippie times, right?
I missed the hippie times pretty much.
Yeah. Was there any psychedelic explorations in your background or anything like that?
Yeah, there was, but much later, very much as an adult, and how is this like Zen or not? Was my question.
Yeah, but it wasn't, those type of experiences weren't what got you into Zen at all?
No, not at all.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about how you discovered Buddhism in particular and kind of what drew you in?
Well, by the time I got to my junior year, I took a course in Buddhism. So now I've got what the Buddha taught as a book, and I'm underlying everything. And I'm thinking, well, now this is a religion. I read everything. I read Taoism, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and Hindus, Vedic scriptures, and I read Native American and Aboriginal things, shamanism kind of stuff, and I read just everything, and the Koran and the Tao Te Ching and the I Ching, and was just getting all kinds of exposure to all kinds of things. And when I kept coming back to Buddhism, because there was nothing in there that I could find that conflicted with science. This was very important. And in fact, there seemed to be some harmony between the two. And so that was important. And then on the UCLA campus where I was at this time, there was a Zen priest by the name of Daizen Victoria, went on to write Zen at War and other books, a Soto Zen priest who had gone to Japan as a Christian missionary and came back as a Soto Zen priest. And he was in graduate school at UCLA, and I was an undergraduate, and we met up. And that was a really exciting meeting. And I talked to him one time over a vegetarian meal in the cafeteria and said, I'm really interested in Buddhism. I recognize that you're a Zen Buddhist priest. How do I do this? And he said, well, you got to learn how to meditate. And he turned me on to something at the time was called the College of Oriental Studies, where he was staying. And I learned from a Vietnamese priest how to meditate. And I remember meditating in my dorm room when my compatriot dorm buddy wasn't there, and having some interesting experiences.
Would you say these were kind of like jhana experiences or samadhi type experiences? Or
samadhi type experiences. That when I would, even my very first time meditating, or close to the first time, it felt as though I was seeing the world more fully in every direction, just sitting on a cushion on the floor.
Yeah, so you had some sort of karmic or genetic I can't think of the word, like
predisposition.
Predisposition, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and so when you went to Victoria, had you already heard about Zen, or were you just looking for Buddhism?
I had heard a little bit about Zen, and I think I had already picked up Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, and I hadn't gotten to Sochu Suzuki Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. That was soon to follow. And I knew that Daizen was a Zen priest because I had seen some pictures of Zen temples and Zen priests, and so I recognized that. And I was particularly frightened of the intense meditation that Zen seemed to offer, and also koans. That just really scared the jeebies out of me. But it also seemed to spark insight and a kind of playful way of being in the world in a both a discriminating and non-discriminating way at once. And I found that very exciting, just the thought of it. And so I was definitely interested in Daizen as a Zen priest.
And was he your teacher for a while?
Well, I wouldn't say he was a teacher. He was certainly a friend. We started a long correspondence that actually we still continue.
And so how long would you say you sat by yourself in your dorm room before you went to the next phase of your practice, whatever that was?
Well, I belonged to some Buddhist groups on campus, and we hosted some sort of Buddhist educational events on campus at UCLA. So I was getting more and more involved, and I was going to the College of Oriental Studies. It's got a different name now, but and getting instruction from this Vietnamese priest on how to meditate, and was meditating on my own, but I hadn't done any retreats. Then after undergraduate school, I went into Vista that's sort of like the Peace Corps inside the United States. And that's what originally brought me to Seattle. And I hooked up with the Seattle Zen Center, which at the time was mostly a Soto group. And did my first sesshin in intensive practice 7 days in the summer of 1977.
And was there a teacher with that group, or is it just lay people practicing together?
No, there was two teachers. The local teacher was Professor Glenn Webb, who had trained enough in Japan and gotten ordained in Japan, but was an art history professor at the UW at the time. And he was also Japanese tea master, and was leading classes in both Zen and tea at the University of Washington. And he was running the group, but he would invite Hirano Osho-san from Eiheiji to come and lead our retreats.
And this was a Soto-shu priest.
Soto-shu priest, absolutely. Very deep Soto-shu.
And what was he like?
He was amazing. Kind of stiff as a board on one level, very bright and playful on another level. And when I remember this first retreat, when he wanted to do a long sit, which would be more than 50 minutes.
5-1-5 or 5-0?
5-0.
Okay.
He would put the bell, the kaichin, over his stopwatch, which was his timepiece, and then you knew it was going to be a really long sit, and you're in the middle of a session. Oh no.
Yeah. And was he an abbot of AHG or just one of the officials there? Do you know?
He was one of the officials. He was not an abbot.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times in Sotoshu in Japan, the abbots are like 80 years old, and it's more of like a honorary position of respect as opposed to a teaching position.
Correct.
And so did you have a chance to do Dokusan with him, or was it mostly just hearing him giving talks and stuff?
Yeah, it was hearing giving talks, but there was one-on-one with Dr. Glenn Webb being the translator. And so there were 3 people in the room at the same time. But Glenn did a pretty good job of just staying out of it and letting the conversation proceed. On the 3rd day of my first sesshin, I had a breakthrough experience. And first of all, I thought I was going to die because of the knee pain, and thought I was sweating blood. It was the summer. And I really thought I was going to die. So at a certain point, I'm not quite sure where this came from, but a certain predisposition that I think actually came from an early abuse history that I don't need to go into. I was ready to die. So this was an amazing confluence, Soto Zen priest and ready to die in my first sesshin. And I just said, well, if I'm going to die, I'll either explode or implode here, because this is impossible to tolerate. And yet I'm just going to do it anyway. And I'm a young man and I may die, so what? This is something I've got to do. And so there was a breakthrough experience where the pain became very distant. And I got up from a sit to do keening, one of these long sits where you put the bell over the watch, and the whole world looked different. And I wanted to say to my compatriots, don't you hear it? Don't you see it? But I didn't say that out loud because I didn't know how to describe what I was seeing or hearing, other than what it already was.
So from your position now as a Renzai teacher, would you characterize that as a kensho?
Yes.
And did you present it to the Soto teacher there? I
did.
Did he seem to recognize what you're talking about?
Yes, he says, now your practice begins.
Yeah. So, which, I mean, there's definitely some criticism of Soto, for ignoring kensho, but I think maybe in a lot of cases it's just, it's not talked about. It's not like it doesn't happen among those deep practitioners. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
He was very familiar. It was not any question that he was very familiar with what I was talking about.
Yeah. So the session ended. Did you feel like it at that point? Were you just Zen? Did you know for a fact that this was your path? Yeah.
And I knew that if I knew I couldn't give this experience to anybody, but if I, in the course of my life, could set up the environment where someone else might experience what I had just experienced, that would be the greatest gift I could give. So now I'm on the path.
So, these openings, they can have different impacts on people. Sometimes if they're really light, it seems like it just comes and it goes, and there's almost no kind of residual wisdom. Sometimes, you're kind of still very much in the midst of samsara, but you just, things are the way reality you thought it was just is not true. And sometimes there seems to be like a real shift. Where do you think it was along that spectrum?
Somewhere between the second and the third.
Okay, yeah. So you carried something with you from it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah. And did you just continue practicing at the Soto place?
Well, what happened was that we wanted to have a resident priest because Glenn didn't fill up to it because he was already a he had trained in both Rinzai and Soto, and had this relationship with Hirano Osho-san from Eido, so we were Soto. But in his travels around Japan, he had come across a Renzai Zen priest who was kind of had gotten in trouble with the rules and broken a number of them, and so had been a rising star but had nowhere to go. And his name was Genki Takabayashi, and
You said that slower. I'm horrible at hearing Japanese names. I'm sorry.
Genki Takabayashi.
Okay.
And he was invited by Glenn to come and try our group out. And he said, well, I'll come for, a little bit and see. And then he ended up staying. So now we switched from Soto to Rinzai. There was one retreat where both the Rinzai priest and the Soto priest were leading the sesshin jointly. That happened once and didn't happen again.
Was that weird?
It was weird for both of them and all of us. And Genki was now our resident priest.
Mm-hmm. And what was your experience like working with him? So before you answer that, I'm sorry. You were a grad student living a householder life and going to visit the center, or were you living at the center? What was your your living situation at that point?
Well, I was a Vista volunteer.
Vista. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right.
So I was not yet a grad student.
Yeah.
That came later. Mm-hmm. And I had just done my first sesshin, and then Genki came in, I think it was the fall of 78, mm-hmm. Early winter of 78. Mm-hmm. And I was there at the airport to greet him, and things clicked. And by the time the Dalai Lama came to Seattle, mm-hmm. I'm looking at a picture of him here, but in any case, then I was just like, all right, I really have to do this as my life. I said to Genki and Glenn, what do we do? They said, well, you're going to have to prove yourself that you're going to do all these sessions, and then we'll send you to Japan. And I said, fine, that's what we'll do.
Did you meet the Dalai Lama?
I did on 2 different occasions.
What was that like?
Pretty magnificent. Yeah, I mean, I've been in his presence more than twice, but I met him twice. Mm-hmm. He came to our little Zen group here in Seattle, mm-hmm. and sat 5 feet from him, and he loved Zen stories and had a wonderful laugh. And he gave a talk on the Four Noble Truths that completely convinced me that if I wasn't already convinced, and I was already pretty convinced, now I was completely convinced. I've got to walk this path.
It's interesting. I know a friend of mine who I would say is very much a secular Buddhist who, doesn't believe in, what he would probably term as, mystical aspects of Buddhism, like transmigration stuff. Even he says, when he met the Dalai Lama, like he felt like the Dalai Lama had like a Dharma field that just transformed everything around him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Genki, who was our resident teacher, he just burst into tears when the Dalai Lama walked in the room, for gosh sake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. So did you go to Japan?
I did.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It was for only a short time, from October 1980 to like February 1981. Was that it? I think that was it.
4 months or so?
Yeah. So it was one winter training session. Mm-hmm. And that was arduous. Yeah. It's definitely changed my life.
So what temple was that?
At Ryutaku-Ji, outside of Mishima on the Izu Peninsula, about an hour south on the Shinkansen from Tokyo.
Was Soen Roshi still the abbot there at the time?
He was not the abbot, but he was still there, and I got to meet and walk with him and walk the grounds with him, and that was amazing.
Mm-hmm. What was he like? Was he playful, or was this after he was hurt, or?
Well, definitely after he was hurt, and the first month or so that I was there, he was in his hermitage and not coming out, and probably for very good reasons. And then we met one time when I was listening to a tape of him giving a Dharma talk, and he just happened to walk through the room that I was in, because I was listening to these English tapes of him giving a Dharma talk, because I didn't know enough Japanese to get something out of the teishos from the abbot there, who was Sochu Roshi. And so he was Soen Roshi was the retired abbot. And, my mouth dropped open when he walked through the room, and he also had a tremendous presence. And he was in scraggly clothes and a long beard, and he just looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said "Gasho," and so I gasho. But after that, he started coming out of his hermitage and in a way making a nuisance of himself for Sochi Roshi, and making long distance phone calls all the time, but eventually he was having meals with us and sitting with us in the zendo, and he took a liking to me, and certainly I was kind of completely blown away that I could have private time walking with this guy around the grounds of Ryutaku-Ji.
In retrospect, he's kind of famous in Zen circles now, but was he kind of a celebrity at that point? You'd known of him?
He was very much a celebrity at that point. In Japan, even, he was considered a national haiku treasure.
And when he would join you guys in the zendo, would he get cleaned up and put on robes and stuff, or would he come kind of in his...
Well, he did a little of both, but he did eventually clean himself up. Yeah, this was 1981.
And was it Sochi Roshi? Sochi Roshi?
Sochu Roshi.
Sochu Roshi. What was he like?
He was powerful. And, I had done some koan work with Genki Takabayashi, and he wanted me to repeat it. So I was fine with that. And there was a place where, shall we say, I made him happy, and he was happy with me. So we got along just fine.
And so was it your initial opening that was the gateway into doing this koan practice, or did they want you to have a deeper, clearer experience?
I had other experiences, but nothing as, frankly, as deep as that first one. And several kind of breakthrough moments, lots of them. And I'm trying to figure out, get rid of this. That's telling me that it's 3:30 and I should go be with you. Oh, damn. Yeah, lots of different breakthroughs, several there in Japan, all wonderful. And, in hindsight, not such a big deal.
And how did you find the koan study? Were they both kind of the same branch of koans? There's one Inzan, and what's the other one?
They were both Renzai koans.
Right, but there's
different branches.
Yeah, were they both the same branch?
Yeah, and then I ended up trading with Eido Shimano, which is another Soen heir, and so it was all the same branch.
And were you as a Westerner expected to do capping phrases?
I'm familiar with capping phrases, and I bounced around with them. But Eido, by the time I was doing 12 years with Eido, he didn't care whether or not I did the capping phrases. He cared that I got through the Mumonkan and the Hekigan Roku and the Rinzai Roku and Tozan's 5 ranks, and kind of skipped the capping phrases, even though we delved into them to some extent. And with his earlier priests and heirs, he had gone into more depth, and by the time he got around to me, it was kind of residual.
So was there any question of staying there in Ryutaku-Ji, or was it always understood you were just going to be there for an ongo?
It was always clear that I was just going to be there for an ongo, and but by the time before I left, I thought I might just stay, but I already had commitments back in Seattle.
Like worldly commitments, or back to the temple?
Both.
Yeah. So you went back to the States. Did you move into the temple at this point, or what was your living situation?
Uh, well, I was residing outside of the temple, and the temple didn't have a place back then. The Seattle
Oh,
Zen Center still met on the University of Washington campus,
I see.
and then
Okay,
then we started meeting other places and renting places, but we didn't have a residential practice yet.
I get it. Okay. And the teacher was still there full time. Was he a full time Zen teacher, or did he work outside of the Zen Center?
Genki Takabayashi did work with he was as a landscape gardener
Hmm.
with a very much of a Japanese landscape view of things.
Hmm.
And he was a writer and a cook and a potter and
Hmm.
calligrapher. He had a lot of Zen art kind of stuff going for him.
Was he a lay Roshi, or
Well,
was
he was
he?
definitely
Yeah.
ordained,
Oh yeah, that's right.
but
Yeah.
as I said, he had gotten in trouble with the hierarchy, and frankly, for good reasons. He had
Yeah.
gotten a woman pregnant and then didn't marry her, and this was just not acceptable.
Hmm. And what was he like? Was he playful, or was he stern? All the above? Was
All
he
the
open?
above,
Yeah.
mainly unpredictable,
Hmm.
playful,
Hmm.
solid,
Hmm.
um, and full of flaws. Very much full of flaws.
Hmm. Um, how did you relate to him as a student, as to a teacher? Did did you
I
have?
loved him very deeply, and we bonded very, very deeply.
Hmm.
But he knew that he needed me to train with someone kind of official.
Hmm.
So because he had been pretty much uh, booted out.
Hmm.
So he sent me first to Joshu Sasaki Roshi and then to Eido Shimano Roshi in
Hmm.
turn for sort of finishing school.
Hmm. At that point, had you been ordained?
I had been ordained. Yeah.
Were you ordained prior to going to Ryutaku-Ji?
Yes,
Okay. And so at this point, your career is to be a Zen priest slash monk.
that's correct.
Yeah. So and is that how you were kind of supporting yourself? Were you working odd jobs on the
No,
side?
I never um, I never wanted to be supported as a Zen priest.
Hmm.
I always had the feeling from the very beginning that being a Zen priest had to be a gift, not an occupation.
Hmm.
So I don't get paid to be a Zen priest,
Hmm.
and my occupation is as a psychotherapist.
Hmm. So was that a career path you went down pretty
It
quickly?
was a
Yeah.
career path that I went down, but I had done everything before that. After being a Vista volunteer, I delivered papers to the paper boys. Just anything and everything. Worked in a kite store. I wrote computer programs. That got me that that made me a lot of money. I did whatever I could do, and had my own software company, and then put myself through graduate school.
Mhm. And so after your graduate school, did you do, your kind of your clinic, I forget the terminology, but you're kind of doing clinical hours and you're being mentored and watched. So you did all that up in Washington State?
Yep,
Yeah. Mhm. And did you do all that prior to going down to Joshu Sasaki, or is that all along?
kind of all along the same
Yeah.
path, and so graduate school came after going to Japan.
Mhm.
Uh, then I was an entrepreneur as a freelance computer programmer. Then that turned into my own company. Then that put me through graduate school, and I was doing because I was always self-employed. I did all the Zen I wanted to do.
Mhm. And did you have a wife or kids? Did you
I
at this
did
point?
somewhere along the line. I had a wife and kid. Yeah, one kid.
Hmm. Yeah. But you're
That
still able to. Would you get away for ongos, or is it mostly just sesshin?
It was just session after session after session.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And so when you worked with Joshu Sasaki, was it you would fly down for sesshin, come back home, fly down for sesshin, come back home? Yeah.
Yeah.
How could you talk a little bit about first meeting him and what that was like?
Um, Joshu Sasaki. I mean, all these characters. some were a bit more playful, some were a bit more stern, but they were all crazy. And they were all powerful, and in the sense of being solid in their practice and their understanding. Solid in their practice and understanding, and terribly flawed. And both things being very obvious. Very weird to our dualistic thinking of, an enlightened person has to be all the things you would want them to be. They certainly were not. But solid in practice and understanding, wow.
So even as an outsider, so to speak, visitor coming down, it was pretty obvious that there was some hanky-panky going on or whatever.
It was pretty obvious, and the very fact that it was tolerated as sort of crazy wisdom on the one side and destroying on the Sangha on the other side, and it was like, oh my God. And then I went out of the frying pan into the fire when I went with Eido Roshi, Eido Shimano.
Yeah. So with Sasaki, I remember reading once, you can tell me whether this is true or false, that he didn't follow the regular Renzai koan curriculum and created his own koans.
He did create his own koan curriculum, but they were all They were all parallel to what I would say was the traditional curriculum. He was getting at the same points, just changing the venue for America. But he was making them up as he went along, but it was like there were parallels.
But so you didn't have a set curriculum. It was just, you came into the room, he kind of read where you are, and gave you a koan.
Correct.
Yeah. And
I can't really tell you whether he had a set curriculum or not. I don't know what he did for others. I know what he did for me.
Yeah. And so you practiced up in Seattle, you practiced at Ryutaku-Ji. Was the general forms and vibe, were they pretty similar there?
Similar enough. Yeah. So Ryutaku-Ji, or down in New Mexico, or with Eido Shimano in New York at DBZ, they were all similar enough.
And at that point in your Zen practice, what did you see as the role of koan? So you'd broken open. You were you feeling like what was the purpose of you doing koans? Were you doing it because your teachers asked you to? Were you seeing changes in yourself?
I would say I would say that the breakthrough was like opening my eyes, and the koan practice was like putting on glasses.
Okay.
So it was making the same view sharper.
Okay. And so how long did you commute down and practice with Joshu?
I'm going to say maybe 3 years. And then my main time was 12 years with Eido Shimano.
And was that a similar situation when you would fly out kind of as a commuter?
I would go I was still doing 4 sessions a year in Seattle with Genki Takabayashi, and then I would go for 2 sessions a year with Eido Shimano. So I was doing 6-week-long or 8-day sessions a year. That was plenty.
And at that point, those were the 2 Renzai teachers in the North American continent. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And there's no question of practicing at a Soto or Yasutani thing. You were Renzai all the way at this point.
At this point.
Yeah.
I mean, I still had an affiliation with Hirano Osho-san through Dr. Glenn Webb, but I didn't sit after Genki finally became established as our resident teacher. We really flipped from Soto to Renzai.
Yeah. And so at your home temple, did you guys follow Renzai forms in terms of choka, which for people who don't know is morning chanting and stuff like that? Was there a lot of like monastic forms and ritual and stuff like that, or was it mostly?
No, relatively pared down. At DBZ, we went back up again, but even at Ryutaku-Ji, there was morning service, then there was zazen, then there was sweeping. or cleaning. I mean, that was your day, unless you were in sesshin, and then sesshins were a whole lot like sesshins here.
This is jumping back in time a little bit, so sorry. But so when you were at the Soto in Ryutaku-Ji, were most of among the, how many would you say there? How many Unsui monks were there practicing?
Ryutaku-Ji were probably about 10 at the time.
Yeah. And did you feel that they were kind of like temple sons, just kind of doing their time to get their certificate, or were there like some serious practitioners?
There were some serious, maybe one or two serious practitioners, and everybody else was doing their time.
Yeah. And would they talk openly about it? Like,
yes, and they couldn't understand at all why I was there until I said, "Well, I was assigned to be there." Oh, they could understand that.
So about that, so I mean, not being there for any religious aspiration, presumably they're not breaking through Mu in a genuine way. So did they just stay on Mu, or were they kind of given a courtesy pass of Mu and kind of go down the curriculum a little bit? Like, do you have any idea how that worked, or was it just not talked about?
It wasn't much talked about, but there was definitely, I mean, everything was about Mu at either at Joshu Sasaki, Eido Shimano, or Ryutaku-Ji with Sochu Roshi. I mean, it was all about Mu. And you didn't go anywhere unless you had satisfied multiple sub-koans around Mu.
The checking questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry to jump back to the future. So so why did you switch from Joshu Sasaki to Eido Shimano? Was it because of the scene down there?
Well, a little bit because of the scene. It was more because Eido wanted Genki to move down to East LA. Genki didn't want to move down to East LA, and that eventually brought them to a falling out. Not a big, harsh falling out, but Joshu Sasaki was really pressuring Genki Takabayashi to give up the temple in Seattle and come be a part of his system and in East LA. And I was to follow him. And this was it was going to be a package deal. And then when Genki didn't want to move to East LA, which was somewhat understandable, he didn't go and I didn't go because he was my primary teacher. And that ended the relationship with Joshu Sasaki, and that's when he sent me to Eido Shimano.
And how did he have the relationship with Eido Shimano? Just because they were two of the maybe 5 Renzai priests in North America, or did they have some previous?
Well, that was certainly part of it, but they did have some previous. They both shared the same ordination teacher. Well, let me see. Let me get this right.
They sat together at an anniversary session.
They sat together at an anniversary session and got to know each other, and so they knew each other back in Japan, and so it was relatively easy to pick up the conversation again. And Genki told Eido, I've got this senior student. He needs more refinement, especially around koans, because my English isn't all that great. Will you take him on? And after meeting with Eido, he took me on.
So you'd fly out to New York and do sesshin with him.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about what he was like and your first impressions of him?
Scary. He was the person who was most scary. I can't say that I was ever scared of Sochu Roshi, Soen Roshi, Genki Roshi, or Joshu Sasaki Roshi. I was impressed, but not frightened. I was frightened of this guy. He was so stern. He reminded me of my father, and I didn't have a great relationship with my father. So a lot of old father transference stuff was coming up for me. And it made going to DPC hellishly frightening. But I did it anyway.
So how many years would you go back and forth out there?
A dozen years.
And what was the community like around him? Did it seem pretty healthy? Was it culty at all? I mean, did it seem like a vibrant scene?
It was vibrant, but it also felt frankly, it felt cultish to me. And I also had never met anybody with such a fine facility of speaking English and translating the sort of ancient wisdom of the Chinese and Japanese masters into a modern American vernacular. And his ability to get across what his teishos on the koans were like awe-inspiring. So the depth of his understanding was very impressive, especially because of his great faculty with the English language.
So aside of that kind of stuff, like looking back as a teacher now, looking back at him, do you think his Dharma eye was clear?
Well, there's a big difference between, as I've well discovered, between having one Dharma's eye open and clear and having psychological maturity. I would say he had one and not the other.
Yeah. And okay, so as you were studying with him, how soon did it become apparent that, as you said, you were out of the fire into the frying pan? Was it pretty clear pretty quickly that he was having issues, or?
No, unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, it wasn't. He had already been through several hell realms where the Sangha had split more than once, maybe 2 or 3 times before I ever arrived because of shenanigans and inappropriate behavior, very inappropriate behavior. So by the time I got there, it seemed as though he had settled down and that things of that ilk were not happening anymore. And
that rumors maybe, or?
Pardon me?
Had you heard rumors?
I had heard more than rumors.
Okay, so you knew that was the history of the place.
That's correct. But I had not. But I had also heard from everybody that was associated with him, he's changed, and this was now the party line. He's changed, and there was some sense in the time that I knew him that he was changing. I mean, he thought and would say he just thought Americans were a bunch of prudes. But he was also saying publicly that he had made mistakes and that, he had corrected his course. And I believed him.
And so you were fearful of him, but what was the Dokusan experience like? Would he sit and talk to you, or was it just short, like rapid fire, you pass, or you don't, and you're out of there type of experience?
It was fast. Dokusan's always fast with any teacher I've been with. You're either presenting something that is of interest or isn't, and very, very often it was just practically ringing the bell as soon as you walked in. But you'd make some presentation and you'd close some door by ringing the bell, and then you'd go back and sit with it some more. And eventually, I have to say, I started to get the hang of what the koans were pointing at a much deeper level, and in a way, learned Zen speak enough to communicate back to them in a satisfactory way. And it went from like pulling teeth to like a knife through warm butter eventually.
So was this the style of, in his koan curriculum, did you go through the books one by one, or were they all mixed up?
We went through the books one by one.
And as you're going through did you feel the different anthologies had different feels to them, or they had certain, like, does the Bumenkan in your eyes have a different theme than the Blue Cliff record, or?
Well, I don't think they have a different theme, but they definitely have a different style and feel.
But does it have like a practical difference in kind of, as kind of cleaning the glasses, to use your analogy earlier?
Not particularly. I mean, definitely felt as though the Blue Cliff record followed the Bumenkan. I liked that, they were all so mysterious, but the Bumenkan was was, it was like, no, you had to do the Movalkan first before you could do the Ekiano, the Blue Cliff Record. Because what was written in the Blue Cliff Record was just more obscure, in my view, than what was written in the Momonkan. And so you needed to be a little further along to kind of get it.
Okay. And does your curriculum have the Renzai Roku as part of it? And
Correct.
and sorry, it's been a long time since I've read that, but to me they were kind of like longer passages. How are those koanized, or is that kind of like shop secrets? You can't really talk about it.
Oh no, it's easy. I mean, just every line that can be a koan. Just like every line that Dogen wrote could be a koan. There's multiple layers, and so the curriculum concentrated not on the longer passages, but the shorter ones. And there are different sections of the Rinzai Roku that we concentrated on as koans. And when Rinzai is more or less lecturing, we practically skipped over that.
I see. So like there might be a couple paragraphs, but there's just one line that was extracted, and that's the koan.
Correct.
Yeah. And so you guys did the 5 ranks. Do you do the precepts as koans there?
Yes.
Yeah. And I once read that he made some Western koans. Like, is that true? Like I think he's Meister Eckhart, like stuff like that. Is that?
Never did that with me.
Okay. Okay. So you were and did you ever talk to him about the history of the place or his behavior or anything like that? I mean, or do you just kind of have a professional relationship?
We had a very professional relationship until there was another incident. And then, I, along with everybody else, was all on top of him, except for the cult fringe that was definitely there, that was supporting him no matter what. That became the last 2 years or so of my association with him was all about what are we going to do about this, and how are we going to make some transition, because frankly you got to go.
So you were more than just a visitor at this point. You were enmeshed in the community.
I was very much enmeshed in the community. I was already one of his Dharma Heir.
Oh, you were. So you were his Dharma Heir. I see.
Yes.
I didn't realize that. Remind me your original teacher, Rinzai teacher's name again?
Genki Takabayashi.
Was he still around in Seattle through all of this?
Through most of it. He retired and in about 1998, and I became the abbot of the temple here in Seattle, second abbot in 1999, and he moved to Montana, but I would go visit him all the time.
And a little bit of Zen Geekiness. When you received Inca, was this a private ceremony or a public ceremony? What was that?
Public ceremony.
Yeah, and then you received a certificate of Inca, an Inca certificate. Yeah, it's not like Soto where there's lots of different private ceremonies and documents and all that.
It certainly could be done in private. In the States, in the Rinzai circles, at least, it's done publicly.
And so once you got prior to Inca, had you started taking on a teaching role?
Yes, definitely. And I would say prematurely, but it was what it was.
And were you offering koan training at that point?
At that point, I was doing what I would call Dharma interview and not Dokusan until after Inca.
And so you didn't give people Mu until?
I was already working with people with Mu before Inca, and that's not kosher, but it just is what it was.
Yeah. And do you think it's not kosher just because it's important to keep kind of the purity of the forms alive, or do you think you needed deeper insight before you could have been the most effective teacher you could have been?
Both.
Okay. Okay. So you received Dharma transmission. He acted up again. Did that kind of sever your relationship with him, or did you?
Yeah, it did. I mean, not right away. After about a year, it did.
Did you publicly rebuke him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was upset.
At that point, we weren't even talking.
Yeah. And okay, so maybe this is a good segue into talking a little bit about, you're a recognized Rinzai teacher, you're a psychotherapist. So can we talk a little bit about what you see as the differences and similarities and relationship between clear seeing of who someone is, maybe we could call it spiritual reality, and psychological health, behavior, and then maybe we could mix into that ethical behavior and the precepts and so forth. Do you kind of have like a grand unified theory?
I do.
Yeah.
And I think psychological maturity is harder to come by and much more important. And I also think that psychological maturity without, for lack of a better term, spiritual depth is in its own way weak. But if I had to choose between the two, I'd definitely favor psychological maturity over spiritual openness. And penetrating experiences that give you a sense of what the ancient masters were talking about. That's all fine and good, but you got to put the two together to have anything that's very meaningful or useful.
So tell me if you would agree or disagree with this statement. Would you say that spiritual maturity kind of resolves existential issues, but doesn't necessarily erase trauma or conditioning, programming, and stuff like that? And then that's like another realm you need to work on, or do you think there's some gray area there?
Well, there's overlap, but spiritual awakening will give you the spaciousness that may well be needed in order to do that deeper shadow work. But and if you don't do that deeper shadow work and there's shadow work to be done, it's called spiritual bypassing.
And it may.
And I would say Eido Shimano, Joshu Sasaki, Genki Takabayashi, and probably everybody else has done a lot of spiritual bypassing.
Do you think it was just kind of bad luck with those three coming over, or do you think there's a deficiency in the traditional Renzai approach to developing human beings?
I think anybody who who leaves Japan is broken in some way. Otherwise, they would have never left. That's why they left.
Okay. And do you have relationships with contemporary Renzai priests in Japan?
No.
And so at this point, you're a long-standing teacher. Do you have any ordained students?
Quite a few.
Yeah. And then have any of them received your transmission?
One.
And who is that? Is that something you feel comfortable
enough? Rinzai in Portland, Oregon.
Okay. And is it he or she?
He.
And does he have his own center?
No rank Zendo in
oh, okay. All right. I know that place. I didn't realize there was a connection there. And
where are you, Barry?
What's that?
Where are you?
Sacramento.
Okay.
Yeah. And so right now, let's say somebody comes into the door of your center. Let's say there probably no such a thing, but they're the typical student, right? They're not necessarily too psychologically messed up, and they just have a kind of a burning desire to awaken. How do you start working with them? Do you do breath counting initially? What's kind of your, or is there no formula and you kind of take each student as they come, so to speak?
So Kokan, which includes breath counting, is certainly the beginning, and then moving on to move. You might spend there a long time.
And what are you looking for in a student before you move them from breath work to move?
Well, the beginning of some insight into their own nature, and a certain enthusiasm for the practice.
There's no sense of, Maito Roshi talks a lot about, kind of having like an embodied practice. Is this part of your tradition at all? Like that kind of like is that what you're, if it is that what you're looking before you switch from the breath work to mu, or is it more a question of prajna?
I don't have a fixed rule. It's more like come and sit. The more you sit, the more you're going to get out of it.
I see. Yeah, it makes sense. And so, so are you involved with any contemporary Zen organizations now in the United States? Are you involved with the wider Zen world
Yeah,
at all?
I'm part of the American Zen Teachers Association, and I sit on their membership committee.
And what are some issues you see, both pluses and challenges, with contemporary American Zen these days?
Well, we're very young in Buddhist terms, not even barely 100 years, and that's stretching it to count that far. Where will we be 200 or 300 years from now? I don't know, but we have a long way to go. And I would love it if there was more organized practice. Yes, Charlie. If there was more organized practice. In the sense of I wish the AZTA was more strongly organized, and that there was a place for when something went awry, that there was an oversight that they have in Japan, where if something is way off, it goes up the pyramid, as it were, to be dealt with. We don't have anything like that. Soto Zen does a little bit, the Rinzai doesn't, and the AZTA could fill that role, and it doesn't.
And I imagine that's something that's discussed, and just the majority doesn't want it to be.
The majority of AZTA, or at least the most vocal members, want to keep it simply collegial, and I think it has room to be much more than that.
What, just to be devil's advocate, what is the utility of it being collegial? Like what role does that fill?
Well, we can talk about together. We could talk about trouble with students. You got a borderline student, or we could talk about insurance policies, or we could just shoot the breeze of what it's like to try and run a temple in America, that kind of thing.
I see. So like professional support of challenges you find being Zen teachers.
Right.
And did you say you're on the membership committee? Is that correct?
I'm on the membership committee, yeah.
Is that a contentious position, kind of being a gatekeeper, so to speak? Because I imagine
it's a little bit of a gatekeeper, and yes, it's a bit of a gatekeeper.
Is that is it generally, if someone applies, they know what the criteria is and they get in, or are there cases
generally where they know what the criteria is because we publish it, if you're bold enough to apply, you'll probably get in, but probably at least, I don't know, 1 out of 5 we reject. It's like, that's not enough training.
And is that the main criteria, the training?
That's the main criteria. I mean, there's another criteria that your organization or temple have an ethical policy that has some teeth in it. That's also one of the requirements. And what is it? And show it to us.
And the quantification of the depth of training, is it hours spent in sesshin? Is it years training? I mean, like, how do you guys actually quantify it?
There's generally posts that are in various traditions. There's the chant leader and the cook and the overseer and all these different posts. What posts have you done? Have you been in a residential practice? Have you? How many sesshin have you done? How many hours in a day is a sesshin to you? And how many years have you been training at that level?
So when you mention residential, does that mean a residential period of practice is a requirement to joining these?
It's not necessarily, it's certainly a preference, but it's not necessarily an inhibitor if there's been decades of practice and tons of sessions and an authorization within your lineage. That's acceptable.
Are there lineages that you guys consider as legitimate and some that you don't? Does that ever come into play?
It comes a little bit into play, but if it's an organized group that has some historical lineage, I mean, that's about all that we're looking for.
So how would you, so you're ordained, and your Dharma Heir is ordained. What do you see as the differentiation between a house, well, let me ask you this. What is the opposite of being ordained?
Well, the thing that I think makes ordained is that you said by being ordained, you want to help propagate whatever lineage you're in, and that's your top priority. That family and raising kids and some other vocation are second. And it's not that you can't also be a householder, but that your top priority is propagating the lineage practice so that it can continue for another generation. That's what a priest is in my mind.
Okay.
Ordained.
And would you give Dharma transmission to someone who's not ordained, or are you looking for ordained heirs?
I'm looking for ordained heirs, but I have not excluded the possibility of giving transmission to someone who is not ordained. So I don't exclude that possibility, but it's not what I'm looking for.
Would you say resolving the Buddha way and finishing the Koan curriculum are synonymous? Like, are there people who finish the curriculum and you feel they're not ready?
Yes.
Or do you just not finish it? Yeah.
Yeah, there are people who finish the curriculum and are not ready. There are people who haven't finished the curriculum but are kind of ready. They're already leading a group, and that may not be perfect, but they're ready. They just haven't finished the curriculum yet.
Interesting. So I've visited a lot. I've lived in different areas, and plus, if I visit somewhere, I mean, this is all pre-COVID, obviously. If I visit an area, I'd usually pop in and check out the local Zen group. So I've seen a pretty good cross section of Zen sanghas in America. And one thing I've noticed over the years is it's aging, and not in most people are aging out of it, are not being replaced as an equal number of younger people coming in. There's some places like Maida Moore's center where he seems to be attracting a lot of younger people, mostly because he's probably active on social media and so forth. And it's obviously a place if you want hardcore residential training, which a lot of young people do. That's a place it's a well-known place to go to. But more on kind of like regional Zen groups, especially if they're not residential, it's mostly baby boomers, and numerically. Are you, like, locally, are you seeing a lot of young people coming into your center? Is it mostly an older cohort, or do you see this as a challenge?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not one I'm too concerned about. And there is enough younger people that I don't have a concern. Although there is aging out, certainly, that happens to all of us. And there is not the same influx that there once was, I think, of younger people, but this just doesn't concern me. Not that many people are going to be attracted to Zen practice, and the few that there are is enough.
Cool. So maybe the last, unless there's more you want to talk about, maybe the last topic I'll talk to you about is so obviously with COVID, a lot of stuff has moved online. Some teachers, some well-regarded teachers are offering koans through Zoom. Some teachers scoff at that and they would never do koans through Zoom. What's your stance specifically for koan training? What's your opinion on kind of a video, like a remote Zoom style experience for that?
Well, I certainly started out prior to COVID saying I would never, ever do koan training over Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID, unfortunately, had to change my mind on that. And I don't think it's going to go backwards at this point. I've begun to appreciate, for example, we had an in-person retreat with 20 people and 4 people were on Zoom and did the whole damn retreat,
Mm-hmm.
the whole sesshin, 12 hours of sitting a day sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
Remotely.
Mm-hmm.
One in the San Juan Islands, one up in Alaska, one down in Brazil, and one in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're covering 2 hemispheres in 5 time zones, and each one of them are serious practitioners, and they'll get to the temple when they can.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I do. It's embarrassing to say, koan practice over Zoom today in the 21st century, and because of COVID. It's something I never thought I would ever do, but I can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
For a select few.
So you were kind of forced to discover that it is something that can work.
It can work.
Yeah. And I had another question, but I forgot. What was it? Well, I remember. I don't remember.
Okay.
Okay. Well, are there any other topics you'd like to talk about before we take off?
Just to reemphasize that spiritual awakening and psychological maturity are not the same thing. If I had to choose between the two, psychological maturity is much more important.
Oh, I remember my question now, and it's actually on that topic a little bit. So given the challenges you saw with the teachers that you worked with, do you guys do Jukai, or do you have a Jukai? Yeah. So especially when you do Jukai, do you find yourself emphasizing the precepts more than maybe would have for that reason? Can you talk a little bit about that before we go?
Well, we emphasize it more than was ever emphasized for me, and we hold precept classes before you can even apply for Jukai. And, that wasn't true in my day. And that's examined, and books are read, and topics are discussed well before you do Jukai.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you guys examine the precepts from both a relative and an absolute perspective at this point?
We do it, to start, we do it mainly from a relative perspective, mm-hmm. and then hint at the absolute or transcendent perspective. Mm-hmm. And say we'll definitely get to those, but let's just look at the relative to start.
Mm-hmm. And the absolute is at the end of the koan curriculum when you revisit the precepts from that perspective.
Correct.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I greatly enjoyed this interview, and hopefully you could come back someday and we'll talk about some more stuff.
Well, I'd love that, Barry, and I'm glad that in our previous encounter you found it useful.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right.